No one in the studio thought she belonged there, under the bright stage lights, surrounded by polished celebrities and high-energy contestants. She looked like someone's lost grandmother who'd wandered onto the wrong show. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her old, worn purse. Her faded cardigan and soft smile made her an easy target. And for the host, who thrived on viral funny moments, she was perfect bait. The segment wasn't even planned. A last-minute cancellation left them scrambling for filler, and when a producer spotted the old woman sitting quietly in the audience, she whispered to the host, "Call her up. Could be hilarious." The host grinned. Everyone backstage grinned. Ratings were ratings. "Ma'am," the host announced loudly, pointing at her. Cameras zoomed in on the surprised woman as the audience laughed, assuming this was a prank. "How about you show us what you can do on the piano?" The crowd roared. Some people whistled. A few clapped ironically. The old woman stood up hesitantly, clearly embarrassed, but she didn't protest. She simply nodded and walked toward the stage, moving with slow, careful steps. The host leaned into the mic, still smirking. "Let's give our unexpected guest a chance to perform." More laughter. She didn't react. She simply walked to the glossy black piano at center stage, gently touched its wooden edge, and lowered herself onto the bench. The audience quieted just enough to hear her settle in. Her fingers hovered over the keys. And suddenly, her posture changed. Her back straightened. Her hands stopped trembling. Her fingers, thin, veined, elegant, curled with familiarity, like they had done this 1,000 times. She closed her eyes for one short breath. Then she played. Not a simple melody, not something hesitant or beginner-like, but a storm. Her hands danced across the keys effortlessly, weaving a powerful, emotional piece that washed through the studio like a wave. The entire room went silent. The host's smirk vanished. The camera operators forgot to move. Some audience members lowered their phones, stunned that their funny moment had transformed into something heartbreakingly beautiful. The notes rose and fell with such emotion that people couldn't help but feel it. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man wiped a tear quickly so no one would see. Even the cynical judges, who had been rolling their eyes, sat forward, completely captivated. Every flourish, every soft whisper of sound, every thunderous crescendo seemed to tell a story none of them knew they needed to hear. It no longer felt like a performance. It felt like a confession. When she finally struck the last note, letting it echo gently into the silence, no one moved. No applause, no whispers, just stunned stillness. Then the studio erupted. People stood, chairs scraped. The applause was deafening. Some cried openly. Others shouted bravo. And where did she come from? But the old woman didn't turn to look at them. She simply placed her hands in her lap, breathing softly, almost sad. The host rushed toward her, overwhelmed. "Ma'am, how? Where did you learn to play like that?" She looked up at him with calm, tired eyes, and said softly, "You dragged me here as a joke. But once, a long time ago, music was all I had." Before he could respond, someone else pushed through the crowd, one of the judges, visibly shaken. "Wait," the judge said, voice trembling. "I know that piece. No one plays it like that except—" The old woman looked at her. The judge swallowed hard. Except the composer herself. The audience gasped. The host froze. And the old woman simply smiled, as though finally being recognized didn't bring joy. The judge's voice cracked as the realization sank in, and the entire studio held its breath. "You're her?" she whispered. "The woman who disappeared decades ago? The prodigy who vanished after her final concert?" The old woman didn't nod, didn't confirm, didn't boast. She simply placed her fingers gently on the piano keys again, almost as if touching an old friend. "I didn't disappear," she said softly. "Life took me somewhere else." The host, who had been pale since the revelation hit, stepped back as if he'd suddenly realized how cruel the host's setup had been. The audience watched, stunned, unsure what to say or do now that the person they mocked had just delivered one of the greatest performances they'd ever heard. But the old woman wasn't angry. If anything, she seemed tired of hiding, tired of being forgotten, tired of pretending her hands didn't ache to touch a piano again. I used to play, she continued, her eyes distant as though looking into a world the others would never understand. Before my husband got sick, before my daughter, before everything changed. The judge took a shaky step closer. Why didn't you return? You could have been the greatest pianist in the world. The old woman slowly looked up, and her expression softened. Being the greatest wasn't as important as being there for the people I loved. The room stayed silent. Even the cameras seemed to hum more quietly, as if they too were humbled. Then, from the back of the studio, someone began pushing forward, a woman in her 40s, elegant, well-dressed, tears running down her face. The old woman saw her and went still. The woman whispered, voice cracking, "Mom?" A stunned gasp rolled through the audience. The judge looked between them in disbelief. "Your daughter? But we heard. People said she passed away." The daughter shook her head, wiping her eyes. "No, we got separated. A long time ago. I searched for you for years." The old woman's lips trembled as the daughter dropped to her knees beside the piano bench, taking her mother's frail hands into her own. "I heard the music," the daughter said, voice trembling. "No one plays like you. I knew it had to be you." The studio was completely silent, many wiping tears without shame. The host, humble beyond words, stepped back, ashamed of the stunt that unintentionally reunited a family. The old woman stroked her daughter's cheek gently. "I didn't think you wanted to find me." The daughter shook her head fiercely. "I never stopped." The old woman's eyes filled with tears she had held back for decades. But before she could speak, something shifted behind the cameras. Producers rushed, whispers spread, and a red light blinked overhead. The show was still live. Millions were watching. And then, out of nowhere, a man stepped onto the stage, furious, shouting at the crew, someone who clearly wasn't supposed to be there, waving papers, pointing fingers, yelling accusations at the producers about exploitation, manipulation, and lies broadcast for entertainment. The audience turned their heads. The daughter clutched her mother's hand, and the old woman looked up at the man approaching, her eyes widening in shock as recognition dawned. "Is that?" the daughter whispered. The old woman's voice trembled. The man on stage, disheveled, breathless, eyes burning with urgency, froze when the old woman whispered those words. The daughter's grip tightened. "My father? But you said he—" "I thought he was gone," the old woman whispered, tears gathering. "I thought he left us. I thought everything fell apart because he abandoned us." The man stepped closer, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger, guilt, and desperation. "I never left. They took me off the show years ago, and the studio hid everything. They broke my contract, blacklisted me when I exposed their lies. I tried to come back, tried to find both of you, but they buried every trace of me." The audience gasped, realizing the scandal unfolding live. A producer rushed forward, attempting to pull him back, but he shoved the man's hand away. "No, not this time. Not when my family is right here." The daughter stared at him, eyes wide, memories rippling through her face. Joy, confusion, and then disbelief. "You're really him? My dad? You're alive?" He nodded, chest rising and falling fast. "I looked everywhere for you. I didn't know where your mother went. I didn't know why no one would tell me anything. They made sure I couldn't find either of you." The old woman covered her mouth with trembling fingers. The weight of decades of pain and misunderstanding pressed down like a storm. "Why didn't you fight harder?" she whispered, voice cracking. "I did," he said, almost collapsing to his knees. "Every single day, until I had nothing left." The daughter looked between them, emotions overflowing. "And all this time, all three of us were suffering alone." The man nodded, eyes glistening. "I saw your hands on the piano," he said softly. "I knew that touch, even after all these years." Slowly, he reached out his hand, not to demand, but to ask. The old woman hesitated. The audience leaned forward. The cameras zoomed in, and then she placed her hand in his. The studio erupted, not with cheers, but with raw, stunned emotion. People cried openly. Even the judges wiped their eyes. But the moment didn't end there. From the control room, Alarms started ringing. Producers shouted at each other. Someone yelled, "Cut the feed! Cut the feed!" But it was too late. Millions had already seen everything. The truth, the reunion, the scandal, and the three people on stage who had been torn apart by lies, finally standing face to face. The daughter put her arms around both of them, shaking with sobs. "We're together now," she whispered. "They can't separate us again." But just as they embraced, something else stirred at the edge of the stage. A security team, a furious executive, and a man holding a contract folder that looked far too familiar. The old woman's eyes narrowed. "Not him," she whispered. The father's expression darkened instantly. The daughter looked at both of them. "Who is he?" The old woman exhaled slowly, voice trembling with something deeper than fear. The man with the contract folder stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing across the stage. He wasn't just any executive. He carried himself like someone who believed he was untouchable. The audience instinctively fell silent, sensing a final confrontation. The old woman straightened her back. The years seemed to melt off her face, replaced by a calm, powerful resolve. The man smirked. "Touching reunion," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But none of this changes a contract you signed decades ago. You still owe us. All of you." The father took a protective step forward. "We owe you nothing. Not anymore." "Oh, but you do," the executive insisted, tapping the folder. "She owed us 5 more seasons. You owed us exclusivity. And when you both disappeared, we were left to clean up your mess." "You destroyed our lives," the old woman said quietly. "You kept my husband from reaching us. You told me he abandoned us. You took my daughter from studio to studio, making her a marketing tool. You ruined everything we had." The executive's smile faltered. The old woman continued, voice clear. "And then you forced me onto the stage today, thinking you could humiliate me again." The audience murmured, anger rising. Even the judges shifted uncomfortably. The daughter stepped up beside her parents, lifting her chin. "We aren't scared of you anymore." But the father wasn't done. He snatched the folder from the executive's hands, opened it, and held it up to the nearest camera. "These contracts," he said, voice booming, "expired 20 years ago. This entire show has been operating on lies." Gasps erupted in the studio. The executive lunged forward, trying to grab the folder back, but security, seeing the audience's reaction, stepped in front of him instead. The lead security guard shook his head. "You're done." Within seconds, the executive was escorted off stage, shouting empty threats. The father turned to the audience, to the cameras, and finally to the old woman and their daughter. "We're free," he said softly. "Finally." The old woman felt tears spill down her cheeks, not from grief, not from pain, but from release. For the first time in decades, she felt her chest expand with something she thought she had lost forever. Peace. The daughter hugged them both tightly, her voice shaking. "Mom, Dad, we can start over." The father looked around the studio. "We don't need to stay here. We don't need any of this." Then he turned to the piano. "Before we go," he said gently, "play one more time. Not for them. For us." The audience stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of reverence, as the old woman sat once more at the piano bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling at first, then steadying. She looked at her daughter. She looked at her husband. She smiled. And when she played, the sound wasn't dramatic or flashy. It wasn't for show. It was pure, warm, full of love and memory and reunion. A melody that felt like a story being rewritten in real time. Many in the audience cried openly, not because the performance was flawless, but because it was honest. When she finished, she closed the lid gently. Her husband took her hand. Her daughter took the other. The audience stood, slowly at first, then all together, in a quiet, emotional standing ovation. Without another word, the family walked off the stage, leaving behind the lights, the cameras, the years of silence, and stepping into a future they would finally face together. For the first time in a lifetime, they weren't alone.